Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Marone for Westchester Talk Radio, and we continue with our friends at Hightower Westchester with our series, What Should I Focus On in My? And today we're talking about what should I focus on in my 70s. And we're here with Peter Lang, Managing Director and Partner at Hightower Westchester. And as we continue with the series, we're focusing on the 70s now, not the decade. Okay, not the decade, but the age. So, Peter, tell us, what should your typical 70-year-old, I might know one, by the way, I'm very close to him, be thinking relative to their financial lives? Talk to me and everyone else.
You got it, Bob. First off, you're far from typical. Let's get that out of the way. So let me start by piggybacking on what we talked about in our last podcast, Videocast, when we talked about in your 60s.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So let's go back to that JP Morgan study that I referenced earlier, their guide to retirement. So in the year 2000, about 5% of workers were 70 or older. By 2020, that number increased to 9%. So it's not like it's a huge number, but think about the difference, right? That is almost a doubling in a 20-year time period. And by the year 2030, the projections are about 12%. So while much smaller than the number working in their 60s, which are between 20 and 30%, it's still a significant number of people working in their 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And now another part of the study talks about longevity, right? We all know people are living a lot longer with advances in healthcare and medicine and et cetera, et cetera. So for a 65-year-old couple, there is about a 45% probability that one of them will live to age 95, and a 20% chance that one of them will live to 100. So between working longer and living longer, these are big things to really think about. And yeah, I know I'm quoting some numbers from age 65, a little younger than 70, but the numbers still very much apply.
Wow, they're very eye-opening, to say the least. Now, I have to tell you, I am looking forward to this 85 or 100, 95 or 100 lifespan possibility. Thank you for that. You made my day. It's truly amazing how these lifespans have increased. I, for one, am grateful, given my age. But Peter, are there things that have to happen, things that really we should do in our 70s?
Yes, absolutely, Bob. The first thing I'm going to touch upon is required minimum distributions from IRA accounts. So we'll assume that, you've stopped working, you're now fully retired, and the age changed a couple of years ago. So now at age 72, under the Secure Act that was passed a few years ago by Congress and signed into law by the president, is the age in which you must start your required minimum distributions. Simply put, a required minimum distribution is the certain amount of money that you must take out of an IRA account on an annual basis, otherwise face all kinds of stiff penalties and fines, and we don't want to do that. Now, one option around your RMDs that you can do, that somebody over 70 can do, is do something called a qualified charitable distribution, a QCD. So this allows somebody, in fact, over 70 and a half, not 72, because there's a little quirk in the law that was never changed. Maybe they'll get around to changing it, but I don't want to delve into that one, right? But in other words, let's assume that you have an RMD of $20,000. You can decide to give, let's just assume you decide to give half of that, or $10,000, to your favorite charity. So when you fill out your paperwork at your custodian, Fidelity, Schwab, or whomever you use, you tell them, hey, I want to do a QCD. They've got a separate form that you sign. And let's assume you're giving, $10,000 to, your fill in your blank, your favorite charity. Your favorite charity gets a check for $10,000, and you get the check for the other $10,000. Now you've just cut your taxable income from the IRA from $20,000 to $10,000. So you've cut that in half. Now you're not getting a charitable a donation on your taxes, but you've lowered your income, which is realistically probably more beneficial from a tax standpoint. And it counts. Or you could theoretically do the whole $20,000 to your favorite charity, that counts as fulfilling your required minimum distribution from your IRA account.
Wow. Now, what about if you've not started to collect Social Security? What can happen here?
Well, nothing bad can happen, but if you haven't started collecting, now's the time to start. Even if you're still working, take it. It's not, the benefits is going to stop increasing. And, so basically at age 70, 71, if you haven't started, it's time to start.
Let's move ahead now to what a portfolio might look like with this in mind.
Great question. So reflect back on what I said earlier about longevity, right?
Mm-hmm.
The old thinking used to be, I'm getting older. I can't afford to take any risk. I've got to go all into bonds or all into cash, or I can't have any stocks in my portfolio. I've got to really lower it down. And I think that's thinking based upon what longevity used to look like. People were living maybe into their late 60s, maybe into their 70s. So they were retired for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Now people are living 20, 30, 40 years in retirement. So you need to look at your portfolio as, I need my portfolio to last for, say, the next 30, 40, 50 years. So really what that means is, again, suddenly changing because you're now hit 65 or 70 or 75 and suddenly saying, okay, well, now it's time to completely de-risk my portfolio. It's no longer the right advice. You need to look at your particular situation and understand, the spending that you have and, again, how the portfolio should look. The way we view our job isn't to simply pigeonhole, oh, you're 70 years old, Bob, here's your portfolio. No. You're 70 years old. Let's find out about your lifestyle, about your goals, your obligations, what your dreams are, what you want to do. Is leaving a lot of money to your family really important to you? Is it not important to you? Right? We build those into a financial plan, and that helps us determine, the right asset allocation to have, not the one based upon some preordained thing saying, oh, I'm 70, here it is. And then one last quick rule that we generally use for somebody as a quick back of the envelope when it comes to spending. We generally use a 5% spending rule out of a portfolio, meaning if your portfolio is $1 million and you spend 5% a year or $50,000, that portfolio should realistically last you for long beyond the rest of your life. And that's taking into account, a little bit of inflation in there and, adding some growth so that 5% is not a it might be a stagnant percent, but not a stagnant amount.
Okay, we're getting older and we have to think ahead. Let's touch on planning even in our 70s, specifically estate planning. Now, I know we've not spoken about it yet, but it's important. Talk to us.
It is. So again, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep this really brief, and I'm just going to touch on if you haven't done estate planning, it's high time you do the estate planning. And if the last time you did the estate planning, it's so old that there's dust gathering on top of your documents, it's time to review them as well. So let me just go over what each of the kind of documents are very quickly. First, there's the one that everyone knows about, the will, right? Your will basically says, when I pass away, I give my wife, my children, my grandchildren. It's a listing, it's a recitation of who gets what when you pass away. And it's important to have that drafted by an attorney, and realistically by an attorney in the state in which you now reside. Because let's say you wrote your last will 20 years ago when you lived in a different state, and now you've moved to, let's assume you moved to from New York to Florida, which is kind of a typical thing in our area, right? It's important at some point that you have a Florida attorney, not necessarily in Florida, but admitted to the Florida bar, be the one that drafts your will. The next thing to talk about is a revocable trust. In lieu of a will, or in addition to a will, a revocable trust is a document that starts living with you as soon as you sign and adapt it. All of your assets go into the trust, so your trust now owns all of your assets, your bank accounts, your brokerage accounts, not your retirement accounts, but maybe your house, your cars, your other things. And having a revocable trust, you generally aren't the initial trustee, maybe your spouse is as well. Maybe your children become successor trustees when you become incapacitated, right? So the revocable trust, is a little bit, allows a lot more latitude in if you become incapacitated, either temporarily or permanently, for someone to kind of step in and fill your shoes for a period of time. And then it also acts as a will when you pass away. And the big advantage at that time is it avoids probate court. So it keeps matters private. It's not that probate court is so bad, but whatever happens in probate court becomes public knowledge for all to see. The next couple that I'll touch on, next is a power of attorney, right? You should have a durable power of attorney drafted up. These are generally written by states. Every state has their own boilerplate form that you basically sign and initial all the different things you're allowing someone to do. It can be used on a temporary or permanent basis. The next is a healthcare proxy. This is the document that states who gets to make decisions about your healthcare if you are unable to. Your living will is next. It works in concert with a healthcare proxy. It kind of states in advance what kind of care you wish to receive, again, if you are incapacitated. And then a HIPAA form, which is the form that allows your doctor to talk about your healthcare with your family members, or not allow them to based upon what your wishes are. But all of those, 4, 5, 6 documents, I think, are all equally important. But it's important that you review them. Again, your 70s is, if you haven't done it in a long time, it's high time to do it.
Well, these are great reminders. Any other little reminders you want to share with us?
The one last thing I think to touch on is probably to look at your medical coverage. If you are in fact retired, as we spoke about in the last podcast about, you need to sign up for Medicare at 65, you should revisit that. Let's assume you retire at age 71. So now is the time when you probably need to opt into Medicare and look at the different plans and figure out which plan is going to work for you the best. There are options. It's not a one size take all. And lastly, as you get a little older, think about your spending and medical expenses and how these different things kind of play a factor in these. So it's it's all of these kind of things. And the other thing to keep in mind, is be mindful not to be overly generous to your children or grandchildren. Right? It's great to be generous and to help them when you're able to, but don't do it when you potentially are going to be hurting yourself. Your children probably have other avenues to get money, be it a loan against their house or whatever it is they need. Again, if you have the ability, by all means do it, but don't do it when you sacrifice your own ability.
That's such a good point. I'm a grandfather, as you know. And the urge to want to help your children and your grandchildren is very powerful. People need to keep their wits about them, don't they?
They do. They do.
Thank you for imparting this wisdom. And as always, a great job. We've been talking with our good friend from Hightower Westchester, Peter Lang, Managing Director and Partner at Hightower Westchester. Thank you very, very much. And we will talk to you soon.
Take care, Bob. All the best.
Peter Lang, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
HighTower Westchester is a group of investment professionals registered with HighTower Securities, LLC, member FINRA and SIPC, and with HighTower Advisors, LLC, a registered investment advisor with the SEC. Securities are offered through HighTower Securities, LLC. Advisory services are offered through HighTower Advisors, LLC. This is not an offer to buy or sell securities. No investment process is free of risk, and there is no guarantee that the investment process or the investment opportunities referenced herein will be profitable. Past performance is not indicative of current or future performance and is not a guarantee. The investment opportunities referenced herein may not be suitable for all investors. All data and information referenced herein are from sources believed to be reliable. Any opinions, news, research, analyses, prices, or other information contained in this research is provided as a general market commentary. It does not constitute investment advice. Hightower Westchester and Hightower shall not in any way be liable for claims and make no expressed or implied representations or warranties as to the accuracy or completeness of the data and other information, or for statements or errors contained in or omissions from the obtained data and information referenced herein. The data and information are provided as of the date referenced. Such data and information are subject to change without notice. This podcast was created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed are solely those of Hightower Westchester and do not represent those of HighTower Advisors, LLC, or any of its affiliates. HighTower Advisors do not provide tax or legal advice. This material was not intended or written to be used or presented to any entity as tax advice or tax information. Tax laws vary based on the client's individual circumstances and can change at any time without notice. Clients are urged to consult their tax or legal advisor before establishing a retirement plan.